Okay, so now we're in the first section, the introduction. Now, this section right here is just to give you a high-level overview, a little bit more detailed than going over what we're going to be covering. Introducing what functions are. Functions can be very difficult to understand in the beginning because it's new to you. I'm going to do my best to really break it down to a granular form so that it's easier for you to digest and to retain the information. I'm going to make quite a few videos for this particular chapter and the next chapter because it's so many small nuances that you need to really get in order for you to be able to master functions. So if you're new to this channel and you're not a part of the cohort, the curriculum is free. The link is in the description. You can follow along with us. Now, we're going to review just a quick bit of review real quick. And one of the things I want to refresh your memory on, I need you to make sure you understand this. And the question is, what type of language is JavaScript? Put your answer in the comments. Now, once you've answered that, another thing I want you to remember that is very important. What is a variable? Why do we need them? I want you to answer that question. Leave your answers in the comments so we can discuss. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the curriculum. Introduction. We have been using functions throughout your learning so far without receiving a full explanation of how functions work. This chapter focuses explicitly on the details of how functions work, how they can be used, and how you can create functions of your own. A function is a reusable, callable piece of code. Like variables, functions often have names, though the next chapter shows us that we can create functions without names. We'll talk about that later. Now, one of the things that I want to point out to you, and I want you to visualize this for a moment, when we talk about functions are reusable, let me give you an analogy, something to compare it to visualize. Think about your house as being your software. In your house, you have quite a few things to help your house run efficiently. You have windows, you have doors, you have what we call an HVAC system. You have a system, right? Well, that system could be like a component, and we'll talk about that when we talk about components in React. But you have functions in that particular HVAC system that works independently, and they're reusable. One is your central air unit, and then you have a furnace. Then you have something that we call a water heater. Now, those three things are three different functions. They work independently of each other, but they work together for the whole entire system. That's what a function is. I want you to be able to visualize that, because when we begin to create these functions, you want to understand how they work and how they work together. Now, you have already become familiar with several functions: the console.log, the type conversion function, numbers, strings, boolean. Remember, they're different from the primitive data type. Strings and array methods such as index of. When learning about strings and arrays, we notice that a method is a function that belongs to an object. We talked about that. Log is a method. Console is an object. This distinction is important to keep in mind and will be explored in depth in later chapters. For now, Think of a method as a special type of function. Each of the functions we have used works in the same way. By typing the function's name, followed by parentheses, we can call the function, resulting in an action being carried out. Sometimes, as with console.log, we can provide input data between the parentheses, which the function will use to carry out its action. Example: the function console.log prints the provided value or values the input data. Console.log, and we are doing what? Passing it a string. Hello world. You are the compiler. Think like the compiler. When you see the opening quotes, you know that it's a string, and the compiler is looking for the ending quotes. Remember, in JavaScript, it's dynamic. You can use either double quotes or single quotes. They just have to match. And here's the console output. This is an example of a function receiving input. Functions may also provide output. For example, the type conversion functions give back the result of a converting a value. Type conversion functions return a value that can be used by the calling code. Often, we store the return value of a function in a variable. This is why it's important to understand variables and how they work and why we need them. We doing what? We are declaring and initializing a variable with the number function, and we're passing it the string 42. You want to practice saying this, understanding what it's doing, because it's going to make more sense as you go further. Remember declaring and initializing a variable. Console.log, we have a string here which is separated by a comma. We're using what? The type of, and I want to ask you a question. What is type of? Leave the answer in the comment. Num and has the value of what kind of, type is what I'm talking about. What type of, what is it called? And then we console output. The variable name is of type number and has a value 42. Notice there's no quotes in it, and it all flows together, and you don't see the commas either. Example: many arrays and strings methods also return values. This program uses the string method split to break a string into separate components. Notice here, understand how split works, the method works. It needs a delimiter. That means it's not going to be an empty method. You have to put a quote in it or some type of delimiter. You're going to need quotes, and then put a delimiter inside it. Whether the quotes have a space in it. If there's no space, then it's going to separate on each character. If there's a space, then it's going to separate on the spaces. If there's a comma, it's going to separate on the commas. And you notice the output right here. So functions are extremely powerful. They allow us to repeat actions without repeating each individual step of code that the actions are built from. By grouping actions together, functions allow us to be more moved from the details of what they are actually doing. When we want to print a message to the console using console.log, we don't have to know what the console is or how a string can be displayed on it. The behavior is wrapped up within the function itself. This is an example of the broader programming concept known as encapsulation. Here we're introducing this to you. This is a seed now. Encapsulation is the process of packaging up code in a reusable way without the programmer needing to be concerned with how it works. Technically, encapsulation is what we call data hiding, and we'll talk more about that later. A commonly used analogy for describing the concept of a function is that a machine that takes input, carries out an action, and gives back a result. This is known as a function machine analogy. Here's the illustration. If we want to use a function, we must provide it with some input. It carries out an action on that input and returns a result. The action occurs with the function or inside the machine. If we know the purpose of a function, we simply provide it with input and receive the output. The rest is up to the machine itself. You may notice that a function like console.log does not seem to return anything. We will soon learn that every function returns a value, regardless of whether or not that value is used or is even useful. The programming concept of a function is very similar to the concept of mathematical functions. For example, in high school algebra, you learned about functions like y equals 4x plus 7. These functions use the mathematical input x and carried out a procedure to return a numerical result y. Consider the following mathematical function. We can call the function by giving it a specific input, and the number 19 is the output. Functions also allow us to keep our code dry. Dry means don't repeat yourself, a concept that you learned about when we introduced loops. If we want to do the same basic task 17 times across the program, we can reduce code repetition by writing one function and calling it 17 times. Okay, check your understanding. Okay, we made it to the end of this particular section. The next section, the sections going further, I may have to break them down into granular videos. So each section is going to have more details that I want to make sure I cover, because I know you're going to gloss over it because you don't know the importance of it yet. So continue to move forward, take your time, and follow the process. That's the end of this particular video. And remember, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next section.